Sci-fi and fantasy fans everywhere, how are we doing today? I'm Frank Reynolds. Welcome into another episode of Is It Worth It? We review books and movies of all genres, letting you know which are worth your time. Got a big one this week, arguably the biggest release of the year, at least according to some studies out there. It is the #1 most anticipated film of 2021. Dune Part 1. Got to keep that in mind that it plays a big part in this review. This is the first part of what is to be a two-part duology with the potential for a trilogy if they both do well at the box office. More on that later. This is a review of the new movie release Dune. You can watch it in your living room on HBO Max. You can go see it in IMAX as it was shot and meant to be watched. As a fan of the novel, a recent reader of the novel, you can check out the review on this channel that was posted last week. I was super excited for this movie. Having given it a whopping 91 out of 100 score on the Worthy Meter, the second highest ever seen on this channel, I was psyched for Dune 2021. In a lot of ways, it lived up to expectations, and I want to start with some of the things that aren't even plot related. The score. Holy hell, Hans Zimmer, it just crushed it. He's on record saying that Dune is one of his favorite novels. He actually turned down working with one of his friends, Christopher Nolan, on Tenet last year to work on this movie, and he wanted to give it a sound that was otherworldly, like something we've never heard before. He succeeds wholeheartedly. The vibes are strange in the greatest way. It is so Dune. It's the only way I can describe it. It's just like what Dune was meant to sound like. I'll be shocked if this does not win the Oscar this year, plainly said. Cinematography is also astounding, and it's gonna be in that Oscar conversation. This is a beautiful film with so much passion brought to it. Every single scene is shot with a goal in mind, and that is so inspiring and so special and so rarely done these days. It's the prettiest film, especially in this genre, that I can remember watching. When they say you need to see this film in IMAX, I would at least see it on a big screen. I don't know how much IMAX mattered, at least for me, but it is just meant to be heard via the soundtrack and the sound mixing and seen on just the largest screen possible to immerse you in this experience, because my goodness, the production team has taken it up a notch, and all science fiction stories hereafter are going to be compared to this for that reason alone. Now I want to talk a little bit about the actual story of Dune, the thing that this movie is based on that so many people around the world just love and cherish and have done that for 50 plus years. The way that this movie tackles certain elements is awesome. For instance, the voice. If you've read the novel, you know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, you'll know what I mean very quickly into the movie. Had no idea how they were going to handle this on the big screen, was really almost concerned with how they were going to portray this in a way that didn't seem tacky or forced, and they do it in a great way. And that's just one example of many of the elements that transfer from book to film extremely well. There's a lot of flashbacks in the book. I think that the story does a nice job of intertwining them without drawing you out of present situations. The different fighting tactics, the different species, and the different races here, all of them are driven on screen in a nice way. We also have some, I'd say, female empowerment here, given the screen time certain characters such as Lady Jessica are given, and also the way that the novel is depicted with some of the male characters from the book actually being cast as female characters here in situations where that necessarily does not matter. I really enjoyed that part of the movie too. Something else I gotta touch on is how certain depictions of classic scenes are done flawlessly. Scenes like the box and the Gom Jabbar, if you've read the book, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's an excellent depiction of that. Our first experience with a sandworm, that is also something that is just vivid in my mind. It's one of the best scenes of the movie. I really actually only took issue with one of the scenes, the dinner scene from the book. I think that they could have done a better job with that and made it a little bit more emotional. But that was the only translation that I thought didn't land. It's just so obvious that they put so much time and effort into this story, and I'm really excited about where this could go in a part 2. And the only way that these type of depictions are going to work is with a stellar cast. And man, the casting is just on point. Every character selected here to play characters from this beloved source material, they're great. The acting's awesome. The choices for these characters are awesome. I might be a little bit biased because I knew some of the casting before I read the novel, so part of me already had these people in mind when reading, especially actors I'm well acquainted with, such as Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson and those type of big name actors. They don't let you down. They are really, really solid here and they do great work. Last thing from a positive perspective, there's a lot of it, but I do want to touch on a little bit of everything and I want to keep it spoiler free. The way that they make this a part 1, I mean, they do it as well as you can. It does everything possible to give you a cohesive story while also setting up a bigger, larger sequel and a larger world that is going to come to play in a part 2 and potentially a trilogy with Dune Messiah serving as that third and final movie, as it's the second book in the series. We get to explore and dive into this world in ways that are going to certainly satisfy the longtime fans, while also intriguing newcomers to the Dune universe. And yeah, it does end a little bit abruptly, though this is around the point where I personally would have also split it into 2 movies. But with all of that said, it's a very solid part 1, though I do think it is made more for fans of the book than it is for newcomers, and that is going to be my first gripe with the film. Arguably my biggest complaint is in regards to the pacing. The first hour of Dune is excellent. It is an incredible showcase of how to take a novel written in a day when telling over showing was almost the preferred method of storytelling and transitioning it into a modern story that allows us to see things in a showing versus telling type of way without deviating from source material. That said, the second half of the movie does move in jarring ways. There are certain times when things move too slowly and certain times where things move too quickly. It's not necessarily a surprise to readers because that's how the book moves, but for newcomers, they're going to be bored at certain parts of the movie. Flat out, they're going to be bored for some long stretches of time around that midway point, and then the action sequences, they're just too quick. I think that they're going to really enjoy them, but we move on from them a little bit too quickly, and that's going to turn some people off. They're not going to feel like the payoff was worth the wait leading up to those big moments. The long bouts of exposition followed by shorter action sequences could feel a bit draining for people completely new to the series, especially if they're not science fiction fans and if they don't appreciate cinematography and scores and things like that the way that other people might. The dialogue's also really interesting here. When I saw this movie, one of the people I saw it with noted after the film that you could very plainly tell when they were pulling quotes from the source material and when they were trying to cater to a modern audience. And I didn't think about that while watching it, but in hindsight, it's very true. We have this sort of poetic speak at certain times, followed by modern slang that doesn't mesh well. And I see what they were trying to do and maybe why they were trying to do it, but it doesn't work like I believe it was intended to. There's also some twists here that aren't necessarily twists in the novel. The way that the book is structured, some of the revelations that come in this story on screen are predictable. And in the book, that's fine because we actually get to follow some of these characters related to these twists on screen versus off screen like we do here. I think that they might have been better sticking to source material for that rather than trying to set up, big reveals throughout this story. On that note, while that is a problem, they also have saved some of the twists present in the first half of the book for part 2. I'm TBD on that because I want it to pay off. I know it has a potential to pay off, but I can't say it's a positive or a negative, but given how the way that they handled certain twists didn't work for me, I'm not optimistic that it will in part 2, but TBD. On the whole, I think I just wish there was a little bit more emotion present. I know that this is part one and that this is really setting up part two, but the focus on Paul, to the extent with which they do it here, is flawed, because the book does that, and yet there are so many other interesting characters that are actually more interesting than Paul when we talk about character building and determination and motives and that type of stuff. And while we do get some more screen time for some of them, I'm looking at Lady Jessica and Duncan Idaho and these type of characters, there are so many others that could have been explored more thoroughly here had we just relinquished some of the screen time with Paul to them, or just made the movie a little bit bigger. I don't think anyone would have had a problem if some of the pacing issues with the movie were corrected with more emotional scenes. There's a scene very early on in the film, so I'm not even going to call it a spoiler, between Oscar Isaac's character of Leto and his son Paul that is extremely emotional, and it works extremely well, and after that we don't get too much emotional context there. It's almost like they thought that was enough. I wish we had more of that. I'm not going to go so far to say that Dune is soulless, but it is certainly more focused on being an epic rather than focusing on the smaller aspects of storytelling that really could have taken this to new heights that we've just never seen in a film before. And this also goes for the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar. I wish we would have seen them more and had a more emotional investment in the villains of the story, so that when certain elements of the plot unfold, we care just a little bit more than just seeing something cool on screen or how they're gonna do it. Again, though, this is minor gripes from a book fan, but I do think that from people that aren't familiar with the source material, there are going to be bigger problems that might deter them from loving the movie. I think if you're a big fan of sci-fi films, books, or just epic movies in general, you'll probably like the film. It's going to be worth your time. It's grand, it's beautiful, and again, it is epic. The soundtrack's unique, and maybe more than anything, there was such a clear amount of thought and time put into this to create a vision that it's just, you have to appreciate the filmmaking here and just the devotion that was, put into this movie. The first half is stronger than the second, though don't get me wrong, there are certainly elements of the second half that work very, very well. The dialogue's a little clunky at times, and the characters aren't quite as deep as I would have liked them to be, or at least emotional, but on the whole, Dune is absolutely worth your time. On the Worthy Meter, I scored Dune Part 1 a 80 out of 100, so not quite that 91 out of 100 that I gave the book, but absolutely a reputable score and something that a lot of films don't reach. So it certainly speaks to just how good Dune is. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me today on the review. We're actually going to have a review of Dune Messiah next week. I typically don't do a lot of sequels, but given how Dune is such a popular entity right now, and it could potentially be the concluding movie of a potential trilogy here, I want to let you know if that book's worth it if you decide to read the first one. Have a good one. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you guys later.